Hey everybody, this is the DVC Data Nerd, and what this video is about is the points charts and how each resort compares to each other and number of points needed, and then also the dollars per point that you pay in dues and the resulting cost of owning at a specific resort and actually staying there. So what I did was I took the points charts for 2026 at a Resort View studio during the week, and I took each time period shown on the points charts, the specific dates. If you go on the Disney website, they'll give you specific cutoff dates. They do vary year from year based on when Easter falls, when Thanksgiving falls, stuff like that. But even though the dates will change from year to year, all the resorts follow the same time periods in a given year. So they all have the same dates, but the dates themselves will vary from one year to the next. And also, Disney can, if they want to, change these. They could add time periods. They could take time periods away. They are obligated to have the total number of points needed throughout the year to stay the same at each resort. They can't just raise the points chart or make them all, high-end dates. So Disney can always make changes. They generally won't do changes unless they see a supply and demand imbalance where there's times that they can't fully fill the resort, and other times that there's excess demand. But generally speaking, all that they change from one year to the next is just specific dates, depending on when holidays fall and stuff like that. But anyway, I took the cost for one night in a Resort View studio in each time period and added them up as a gauge of how quote-unquote expensive a Resort View studio is. So Bay Lake Tower's case, it's 124 points. I have it labeled yellow because it's a moderately expensive total compared to the others. But it does have really good dues, which ends up being a moderately expensive price. If you look at the prices, it's actually pretty impressive how consistent they are. There's some outliers, like BoardWalk is only $900. Same with Saratoga Springs. Most are in this like $1,000 to $1,200 range, which you have to remember, over the course of 7 nights, is not really that much money if you divide it per night. But you have cases like Animal Kingdom Lodge, say, where it has a good points chart, a cheap points chart, but high dollars per point. The story with Animal Kingdom Lodge is that it has high dues, people say, because the owners are responsible for the animals and the food and the veterinary care and upkeeping the savannah. And that is definitely a true part of the story, but the other part of the story is that there's a cheap points chart. So when you combine the cheap points chart with the high dollars per point, you actually still end up with a moderately expensive place to stay. And then likewise, you could have a place like Poly with a expensive points chart but lower dollars per point. And then even though it's still considered a higher, more expensive place to stay than Animal Kingdom Lodge, Poly, Riviera, Grand Floridian, I don't think it's really much of a coincidence that they're considered the more premium, high-end DVC resorts. So not really surprised that they're the most expensive. The other thing that I included is Cabins at Fort Wilderness. I don't consider them the B studios. They're kind of halfway between a studio and one bedroom. But comparing them to studios, which isn't exactly fair, it has a high points chart, a high dollars per point in dues, and ends up being about 50% more expensive than Grand Floridian, Riviera, or Poly, But then again, I think that there are probably about 50% more square feet at the same time. So I included it as a reference, but it's not really a fair comparison, I guess is my point. The other point I was trying to make on the DIS board website is that would you rather have a place that has an expensive points chart with a low dollars per point, or a place with a cheap points chart with a high dollars per point? And what ends up happening is that you'd much rather it be an expensive points chart with a low dollars per point, because what you can do at 7 months is, you'll pay that $833 every January time frame, and then you can use them if you own a Poly, you can use them at Poly, that's fine. But then at 7 months you can just you use those points that you paid at Old Key West, BoardWalk if it's available, someplace cheaper, and that actually ends up being the cheapest thing you can do. So, like, for instance, if we had $833 that you paid as a Poly owner, and then you use them at Old Key West instead, you're only paying $750 for 7 nights throughout the year at Old Key West instead of the $1,258. But then, let's say you are an owner at Old Key West and you're paying that $11.20 every year. So, if you're paying that and you're going to stay at Poly instead, you're paying almost $1,700 a year. So, expensive points charts kind of have a bad reputation. People just see that and feel like it's a bad deal. But you have to remember that these dues are to pay a fixed amount to operate the resort, between the staffing and utilities and maintenance and all that. So if there's an expensive points chart, in theory the dollars per point you have to pay would go down. And that's kind of, it's not a coincidence that the places with the most expensive points charts tend to also have the lowest dollars per point. And that's actually kind of ideal, because I'd much rather be paying that $833 with the chance at 7 months to use them at a cheaper place. It hurts a lot more to be paying that $11.20 every year, and then you potentially spending them elsewhere where it costs even more points. And then just to kind of reinforce it, here's the same exercise with preferred view. There's a lot of properties that don't have preferred view, but I do have the ones listed here. And I guess the point with this is that resort views are generally the first ones to fill up. So ideally you're paying that $833 at Poly and you can snag a resort view at BoardWalk, say, or yeah, let's say BoardWalk. So again, if let's say Poly points at resort view. So you'd be, if I'm sorry, if you can, we're talking preferred view. Actually, I'm sorry. We'll do resort view and we'll do a preferred view. So let's say you're a Poly owner, you are paying that $833. So if you can snag a BoardWalk resort view, that becomes the $775. I think that's the same number we had before. But at 7 months, generally speaking, and BoardWalk might, yeah, this might be a good example. BoardWalk Resort View might be fully sold out, but you might have some preferred view remaining. So you would be, as a poly owner, you'd be paying this. So you'd be paying $1,000, $1,050 for a BoardWalk preferred view. And if you're lucky, you can get Resort View instead at $775. But generally speaking, I'd say preferred view is not as popular. People don't like paying that premium. And what happens is that the owners, will book all the resort views at 11 months, and then the non-owners have to go in and pay for the preferred view at 7 months. And this kind of ends up being a tax on you, the way I see it, for not being an owner there, basically. The point is that if you have poly, you're paying $833, and you can only get preferred view at BoardWalk, you're paying $1,050, but you're still coming out ahead of a BoardWalk owner who gets the preferred view at their resort. And the whole reason for that is that these dues are lower than those dues. If you own a BoardWalk and you get a resort view, it's $900. But then you're still kind of like halfway in between what a poly owner would pay for a resort view or a preferred view. Let's just really quick just do this exercise one more time, but instead let's say you have Animal Kingdom Lodge and you want to do the same thing. Actually, let's do this. So okay, so let's say you're an Animal Kingdom Lodge owner. You're paying $10.16 per point. If you can snag a BoardWalk Reserve View, you're paying $945, which is going to be more than a BoardWalk owner would be paying. Again, it's simply because this number is more than that number. But in reality, at 7 months, you'll probably only have preferred view available. You'd be shelling out, if you're an Animal Kingdom Lodge owner staying at BoardWalk, you're paying $1,280, which is it's not really, it's just the points that you pay every January. I'm sorry, the dollars you pay every January for points just ends up you're just behind the 8 ball, and you really can't. It's really tough to maximize your value. That's kind of the point I was making. I don't know if there's anything else. I guess the only other point I would make is that, generally speaking, the more expensive the dues get, the cheaper the resort becomes. It really hurts demand to have that commitment to be paying high dues every year. So, the Animal Kingdom Lodge generally is always going to be cheaper than BoardWalk to buy up front, even though BoardWalk's a 2042 resort. So in 2026, you have 16-ish years left of life on this contract, and Animal Kingdom Lodge is decade, at least 10 years more, probably more. So even you have a longer contract life, but those dollars per point in dues kind of really just hurt that value. Meanwhile, places like Grand Floridian gets lots of attention, not only because it's a kind of a flagship hotel, it also has low dues, and that really keeps Grand Floridian resale value elevated. Cabins of Fort Wilderness, they've only been selling those for a couple years now at Disney. very few resale contracts so far, but there's also very few direct sales so far. That $12 a point due just really hurts you. Even if you buy direct from Disney, you're paying that $12.27 every year, and it probably will go up over time. But if you use them at any of the other resorts, you're kind of leaving money on the table, because you are, well, I guess let's just do this just for fun. Let's do cabins at Fort Wilderness at BoardWalk, and what the corresponding prices are. So if you did cabins, if you owned a cabins Fort Wilderness, but you actually used your points at BoardWalk Resort View, which again is kind of tough to get, you're paying $11.41, which is actually not a horrible deal. But again, that's just because BoardWalk has such a good points chart. But then if you use those cabins Fort Wilderness points at BoardWalk Preferred View, again, it would be $12.27 times 126. Ends up being $15.46. So you'd be paying like $340 more than a BoardWalk owner. So, you know, the point I just want to keep hammering to people is it's much better to have an expensive points chart with low dues than a cheap points chart with high dues, because it's almost like two different currencies, kind of. You know, you'd much rather have a currency that, you know, you're paying less every year for it. You know, if let me think of the best way to put it. If Poly's points chart was half as much, if it was like 75 points, its dollars per point in dues would theoretically have to double to like 16. And then, you know, you're just comparatively at a disadvantage to all the other resorts. I feel like I repeated myself enough, so I'll just end the video here. But if you have any questions or comments, feel free to ask in the comments. See ya.